This really is about how to tell a leadership story, a marketing story in a way that actually connects with the audience that you're talking to. The only reason people are paying attention to the story you're telling is because Welcome to Badass Softie, a podcast for leaders who are unapologetically ambitious and want to lead with heart because you're allowed to chase big goals without losing what makes you human. I'm Dr. JJ Peterson, and I am your host and so excited to be here with you today. We are kicking off our first series on Badass Softie, really talking about 3 frameworks that have influenced me at a very high level, the way I think, the way I interact with others, the way I lead, and the way I do business. And last week, we talked about Donald Miller's book, Hero on a Mission. That is really more of a internal philosophy. Like, how do you live your life? And how do you write a great story with your life? And that really is by becoming more of a hero and a guide and less of a victim or a villain. This week, we're taking some of those same principles that we can learn from narrative theories and narrative structures and applying them to your business or your leadership. How do you communicate in a way using the power of story to invite people into a story that they get to become the heroes of? And we're going to break that down. So last week was more internal. This week is really a communication framework using the principles of story. I was dean of students at a university, and I was helping raise up the next generation of leaders. That was kind of what my mission and my purpose was. I taught communication, I taught leadership, and I was also dean of students. And I'd gotten to a point where I had signed a deal. I had created a reality television show called Bad A Brothers. And the premise was that my brothers and I were so not bad A that we couldn't even say the word. I know this podcast is called Badass Softie, so I've definitely grown. My brothers and I were not bad A, and we wanted to become more bad A. So the way that we would become more bad A, badass, is by finding those old laws that are still on the books. Like, you can't cross a Minnesota border with a duck on your head. That's a real law that exists. Or you can't have an ice cream cone in your back pocket in Atlanta, also a real law. And we would research the history behind those laws, and then we would talk about it and how they came about, and then we would break those laws so we could become more bad A. And I decided I'm going all in on this television deal. And as a farewell gift to myself from the school, I actually invited Donald Miller to come and speak to my students about Hero on a Mission, the thing that I talked about last week. I wanted him to teach my students how to live better stories by becoming heroes and guides. And we just kind of connected, and I was telling him about this new thing I'm doing, and he says, I'm kind of doing this new thing too, where I'm taking these principles and I'm teaching companies how to create marketing in a way that actually positions their customer as the hero in the story and the business as the guide. And he said, why don't you come out to Nashville and go through this workshop with me and maybe rebrand your television show, learn to pitch it better when you go in to meet with studios. So I was like, great, I'm not doing much. Waiting for meetings in Hollywood is a lot of sit and wait. And as I went through this process, I was absolutely blown away. I was watching him take the principles of story and apply it to business and marketing in a way that I had never seen before. In fact, it was how I had been trying to apply some of these principles for about 20 years between my own personal career and then also teaching. And I'm like, this guy figured it out. Donald Miller figured out how to tell incredible stories in marketing. And I immediately kind of stopped working on my own brand and I started helping other people because I kind of got it. And I was like, I can work on my own later, but there were some people who are struggling, and being a natural teacher, I started turning around and helping other people work on it. So afterwards, Don said, hey, I'm the only one who teaches this. So would you mind coming back and taking some of the teaching off my plate and helping people in the room. And I was like, yes. And that began what is now a 12-year relationship of me helping companies clarify their message and leaders clarify their message using the power of story. And I love it. I absolutely love it, because here's the thing, is that my PhD is in communication with really an emphasis in narrative theory and narrative marketing. There's a principle in narrative theory called narrative transportation. Narrative transportation is the idea that when you experience a story, a good story, whether it's in a book or somebody's telling it, or it's on the screen in movies, when you experience a good story and you can see yourself in that story, you experience what's called narrative transportation. You put yourself into the story. You actually transport yourself into the narrative. So if you've ever been to a movie and you've jumped when something scary happens, you've experienced narrative transportation. Or if you've ever cried when something happened, I cry all the time in movies. If you've ever experienced that, you've experienced narrative transportation. If you've laughed, gotten goosebumps, that's narrative transportation. Now, what's fun about this study in this area of study is that the more you see yourself in a story, the higher level of narrative transportation that you experience. The research goes on to show that the higher level of narrative transportation that you experience, the more influence that story has on your thoughts and actions. So the more you see yourself in a story, or the better the story is, the more you experience narrative transportation, and the more you are influenced by that story. Now, the research has proven this over and over and over again in movies and books, but it also has shown that this can happen in speeches and in marketing. That when people can experience narrative transportation through communication, any kind of communication, a website, social media, emails, when they can see themselves in that story, and it's a good story, that story actually has even greater influence on them. So what it comes down to is story, when it's done right, it actually is the most powerful way to compel the human brain. You want to change people's thoughts, you want to change their actions, move them to do something. The best way to do that is through story. Now, a couple things that really help us understand how to create good stories. The first thing is kind of what I've mentioned, is that you can see yourself in the story. You have to be able to see yourself in the story. If that doesn't happen, if you can't relate to it at all, story doesn't matter. Not going to have any influence over you. Second thing that really is incredibly powerful in narrative transportation is how you create this is through something called fidelity and coherency. So fidelity and coherency in a story really just means that a story sticks together and makes sense. So if we see ourselves in the story, it sticks together and makes sense, higher levels of narrative transportation, higher levels of influence. Where you can break fidelity and coherency is basically when you break the rules of story. So, for instance, if you watched the last season of Game of Thrones, or even if you didn't watch the last season, everybody's familiar with the principle behind Game of Thrones, I would assume, right? It's about kind of medieval times. There's dragons, there's knights. Well, in the final season of Game of Thrones, there's a scene where they're in this big banquet hall and they're drinking mead and, lamb chops. I don't know what they're eating, but they're kind of all in this big scene, and the camera is panning across. And at the end of one of the tables, all of a sudden we see a Starbucks cup. This really happened in the episode. The camera goes across and we see a Starbucks cup. In that moment, that broke a rule of story, because basically it didn't make sense. The story didn't stick together from a timeline perspective. If we would have saw a big, wooden jug or metal jug full of beer, that makes sense in that story. A Starbucks cup does not make sense. So when people were watching it, they're pausing it, they're rewinding, they're laughing about it, they're talking about it. It doesn't matter how intense that scene was, people are out of that story. They stop having narrative transportation. They stop being in the story, and instead they start thinking about the story. because Game of Thrones broke some of the rules of story, a timeline rule, right? What we have to do then is create stories that people can see themselves in and don't break the rules. How do you do that? Well, what my study really was in for my PhD was studying the StoryBrand framework, understanding how the StoryBrand framework created by Donald Miller helps companies create stories in their marketing that allow their customers to experience narrative transportation. Or in the same way, how people giving speeches or keynotes or writing a book help people experience narrative transportation when they are listening to the communication that's coming at them. When those are done well, people are more influenced. When they're done poorly, people are not influenced anymore. So how do we tell good stories in our marketing and our messaging? In Donald Miller's book, Building a Story Brand, he argues, and I would agree, that there are really 7 basic elements to every good story, meaning there are 7 things that have to appear in a story in order for it to have fidelity and coherency and for an audience to be able to see themselves in. And screenwriters follow these rules. These rules go all the way back to even Aristotle and Plato, who really kind of began the initial study of the power of story and how to use it to move culture. And Don argues that there are really 7 elements to a good story. And once I tell you these, if you haven't heard them before, you'll begin to see these in every movie you've ever seen. Tommy Boy is the same movie as Star Wars. Star Wars is the same movie as Harry Potter. An orphan who is given to his aunt and uncle and has a magic wand that he moves about, and he has to destroy an evil lord. I mean, come on. Harry Potter, Star Wars, same exact movie. And the 7 basic elements in a movie are this. 1, you have to have a character, a main character who wants something. And we have to see this very early on in a movie, but we need to know a character wants something. The second element of a good story is that that character has to encounter a problem. If there is no problem in the story, it's not an interesting story, right? If the main character is just walking around town all the time and everything's easy and good, very boring movie. We're not paying $20 to see that movie. So the character has to encounter a problem. Then the third element of a good story is that the main character has to meet a guide, somebody who comes along and helps the hero win the day. So this is Dumbledore, this is Aslan, this is Haymitch, this is Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the older and wiser sage who helps the hero win. The fourth element of a good story is that that guide gives the hero a plan. In almost every movie, you hear the words, "What's the plan?" or "Here's the plan," because the audience needs to see that there's a clear path forward for the hero to win. Then there is a moment where the hero has to be called to action. That's the 5th element of a good story. There has to be a clear decision that the hero has to make to either be in or out. Usually there's a countdown clock where a bomb is going to go off and the hero needs to decide, I'm going to rush in and I'm going to disarm the bomb or I'm going to run away. But there's a moment that the hero is called to action. And then there are stakes in the story. So the 6th and 7th element of a good story are that the story can either end in failure, that's element number 6, or can end in success. That's element number 7. So we have been watching this movie, and foreshadowed throughout the movie is what a happy ending looks like, and we're rooting for that, or what a tragic ending is looking like, and we're trying to help the hero avoid that. So the bomb goes off and everybody dies, that's failure, or the hero disarms the bomb and everybody lives. That's success. And both of those outcomes have been foreshadowed throughout the movie. So those are really the basic 7 elements of a good story. A character who wants something, who encounters a problem, who meets a guide, that gives him a plan, that calls him to action, that results in either success or failure. How does this then apply to speeches, books, and more importantly, marketing? We need to understand that if we're going to invite people into a good story that they can see themselves in, the first thing we need to understand is, what is it that our character wants? What does our customer want? We need to know that. And that needs to be in our marketing. If they were going to Google you, that's them looking for what they want. Does that language appear on your website? Because if it doesn't, then you're not telling a clear story. Your customer can't see themselves in that story. Second, we need to ask, what problem is your customer experiencing that your brand solves? If you can't name that, and that's not all over your social media and your website and your emails, then customers are not paying attention because they don't know why they need you. So they don't see themselves in the story you're telling. We need to be very clear in our marketing and messaging what problem we solve. And what that is doing is it's saying, this is your problem, customer. See yourselves in this story. Then in the third element, and this is really the big paradigm shift in the StoryBrand framework, is you as a company or as a leader, you are not the hero of the story. You are the guide. And so it's your job to position yourself in your customer story. So you need to show a little empathy and authority, show how you've solved this problem for other people and that you get the problems that they're experiencing. You are Obi-Wan Kenobi. You are Yoda. You are Gandalf. You are not Luke Skywalker. You are not Frodo. Your customer is. They're up and down. They're the ones struggling. You're the guide. You position yourself in a way that helps the hero win. And one of the ways you do that is by giving them a plan. How are they supposed to do business with you? What does it look like to do business with you? And you in a very clear 3-step process that shows them how they win their story by talking about either how to do business with you or what it looks like to do business with you. You have to give your customers a plan. Then there's a moment you have to call your customers to action. Forbes did a study this past year that said that 70% of businesses in America do not have a clear call to action on their website. 70%. 70% of businesses. Are you kidding me? If you have just put a clear call to action on your website so that your hero knows how to act, you win and they win. So you need a buy now button, a shop now, a schedule a call, take this quiz. We need something very clear that your hero, your customer needs to do in order to win their day. And then lastly, the last two elements, the stakes in the story, success and failure. We need to show through images and through language what your customer's life looks like if they don't buy from you, that's failure, or what their life looks like if they do buy from you or do work with you, that's success. What are the benefits, success? What are the benefits that your customer is going to experience? And what pain are they going to continue to experience if they don't? Those are the 7 elements that need to be in your marketing and in your messaging, because those are the 7 elements that make up a powerful and good story. And so what I've done over the past 10 years is taken these principles, these narrative theories, and I go in and I've worked with everybody from, a bakery and an accountants kind of that are local to my area, all the way up to huge companies like Certified Angus Beef and Tempur Sealy and Microsoft. And I've helped them discover how to tell incredible stories through their messaging and marketing in a way that invites their customers to be a part of that journey. You do not want to be telling your own story. Last week, we talked about becoming a guide and the hero of your own story. That was the internal work. But when we move into the external and actually trying to sell products, sell services, communicate in a way that changes the way that people act, we actually have to really shift from being the victim, the villain, or the hero, and we need to become the guide. Because every single person that you're communicating with, they are already the hero of their own story. They're not looking for other heroes. They're not looking for you to be their hero. They're looking for you to be their guide. So when we can create the talking points in the message that we're putting out there in a way that positions our customer as the hero and us as the guide, not only do our customers win, but we win. That is the power of storytelling. And I think that that is actually the best way to do marketing and the best way to do messaging. 10, 12 years ago, even though I taught communication, I taught marketing, if you asked me, like, are you a marketer? To be honest, I would kind of be a little embarrassed about it. I would kind of be like, yes, I've done it for big companies, but no. Now, not at all. I step into my role as guide because I really believe that that is the best place to live. When we can help other people win their stories, we win a story as well. And so now I'm very proud to be a marketer. When I get up on a stage in front of a large audience, I don't have to wonder what I'm going to say or how I'm going to say it. And I don't have to worry about stepping on stage and trying to impress people. I step on stage and I immediately start positioning my audience as the heroes in the story. And it makes things so much easier, so much clearer, and ultimately so much more effective for them and for me. And so, last week I offered a little toast to close out our time together. And I don't know that I'm going to do this every single time, but I want to give another toast to you today because I believe that really almost this is a blessing to put over you to say you have permission to tell beautiful stories and invite customers into a beautiful story in a way that's win-win. When you play the guide, everything changes. And so here is my toast to you. May you always have the words to invite customers into a beautiful story. May you always have the courage to call them to action because you know that there's a better life for them on the other side. And may you always play the guide and never the hero, and may you be richly rewarded because of it. Cheers to you and your journey of it becoming a guide. Thanks for listening. Follow and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. BadassSoftie.com is crafted by Fruitful Design and Strategy.